what an exciting Nintendo Direct. I think it had a little something for everyone. But amidst all the excitement, I think there's some implications that you may have missed. Let's read between the lines of the finer points today on It's All Dug in Games. So today's Nintendo Direct had a little bit to offer everyone, and if you're into role-playing games, maybe more than a little. But with all the excitement that swirled around the rapid-fire announcements, I think there's some really interesting insights and implications that maybe you might have missed. I want to share what I came up with today in this video. I want to focus specifically on 3 of the announcements that, again, I think had some poignant undertones and some things that weren't directly said but needed to be brought up. I want to talk about first the Nintendo World Championships NES Edition. Now, we've seen this announced before. I did a video about it before, but we got a little more detail as to the specific gameplay and some more footage from today's Nintendo Direct, and I have to tell you, it looks really cool. It turns out there's about 150 different, mini games or tests of your skill across 13 different NES classic games. Now, one of the things that really made me stop and think as I was watching this footage was the focus on the concept of speedrunning with this title. Nintendo said the word speedrunning multiple times in the narration of this footage and impressed upon me that Nintendo, I believe, in the development and design of this particular title, was not only looking to pay homage to the Nintendo World Championships, but also, I believe, get a foothold, dip a toe, if you will, into the classic retro speedrunning scene. To wit, here's a few things to keep in mind. Right down to like the font they used for the timer is like very close to the classic font used on the ubiquitous speedrunning clocks that you see on Twitch streams, so on and so forth. That visual presentation almost has that like very similar vibe to it. The concept of having competitive play and leaderboards. I think that what's happening here is Nintendo sees the continued growth and interest in community around speedrunning games and wants a piece of that action, wants to be part of that community. And I think that they're providing potentially a way to really expand retro game speed running and to make it more interesting to people and have more maybe control. Nintendo being a company that probably isn't comfortable with the fact that there are folks that have kind of like made little adaptations to games to make them more speed running friendly, so on and so forth. I think they like the idea of having a little more control, and this could be their entry point. And if they can get some traction, if they get some of the more famous and popular speedrunners like, say, Mitch Flower Power to get interested in seeing if they can get their likeness on top of Nintendo's record books and leaderboards, then I think that that's going to get a lot of people, current and potentially new speedrunners, that want an easy track to start streaming. So instead, again, of setting up a lot of different stuff, they can just stream playing this Switch software, and there you go. They don't have to worry about official timing and all that. And so I think 2 things will happen. I think you're going to get, again, some of the more popular current crop of speedrunners interested in checking this out. And I think that this is going to encourage new folks to come into the speedrunning scene and make a name for themselves by climbing up the ranks and perhaps toppling the different leaderboards. If people start to identify the Nintendo solution, if you will, or infrastructure for speedrunning, I think that this will inspire potentially Nintendo to go forward and then perhaps create speedrunning friendly features in existing Nintendo Online stuff like Mario 3, the original Mario, Ninja Gaiden, some of these games that are very popular among the speedrunning community. So I think that we're going to take a very close look at how things progress with the Nintendo World Championships NES Edition. I think that the takeaway here, it's more than just a fitting tribute to the Nintendo World Championships. Hey, next up, let's talk about arguably the biggest reveal in my... Of course, everyone's going to have their own opinion. I mean, there's some people that think that the Hello Kitty Island Adventure was the biggest reveal. But I think the biggest reveal for my money was the new entry in the Zelda franchise set, I'll call it affectionately, in the Link's Awakening universe, Echoes of Wisdom. Now, this really blew me away when I looked at this in the totality of this trailer and what was going on. I don't think anyone saw this coming. I think this was a genuine surprise. I know there had been rumblings in the gaming world that there was the ideas that Nintendo were tinkering with the idea of having a Zelda game or a concept where Princess Zelda was the protagonist. Well, it turns out those weren't just rumors and innuendo. We now have a game that's coming out later this year where, in fact, Princess Zelda will be the main protagonist. And I think a lot of people, in the excitement and the intrigue of this concept of a game where you play as Princess Zelda, are so excited that they're not looking too much deeper beneath the surface. But I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I realized you're burying the lead if you just start and stop your intrigue with the fact that you're playing as Princess Zelda, because there's a whole new play mechanic being implemented here. They're intentionally diverting from the core concept of melee combat. Sword play is the main way of, dispatching enemies and bad guys in Zelda, and basically replacing it with this concept of echoing an item. So what will happen here is, early on in the game as Princess Zelda, you get this thing called apparently the Tri-Rod, and what it will do is allow you to point at an object, and you have the ability to echo it or clone it anywhere in the game world, including cloning enemies. So this will be the primary way of not only navigating obstacles, solving puzzles, and dispatching enemies. This is amazing to me. This is kind of like a gameplay evolution that is, or a new way of doing things on the level of the gameplay mechanics introduced in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. It's not only going to open up a tremendous amount of possibilities, it's going to make this game infinitely, I think, replayable. I mean, when you think about the original Link's Awakening, for example, if there was a particular obstacle that you had to get past or something you needed to accomplish, for the most part, there was generally one way to do it. And the implication here is now, if you've got to get past a certain obstacle, get to a certain place, achieve something, there might be 20 different ways to do it. And so I think the fun is not just going to be in playing the game. There's going to be a ton of really cool content that comes out of all the unique, creative ways people solve different puzzles and tasks. Just like, again, when Breath of the Wild came out, when Tears of the Kingdom came out, it was not only fun to play, but there were like thousands of cool videos that came up of people showing off their unique ways of navigating that game world. So I think that it's bearing the lead to just focus on Zelda's protagonist. That is cool, don't get me wrong, but the sheer depth of gameplay, and now it's almost like you could look at again, I call it the Link's Awakening universe. The potential here for more games building on these concepts exists now. So it's almost like a new line, or a new line of Zelda games. So this is incredibly exciting to me, almost on the same level of excitement I had when Breath of the Wild was announced. And so I simply cannot wait to dive into this and have fun with it. And finally, I want to talk a bit about the remake, what they call the HD 2D remakes of Dragon Quest 1 and 2, and also Dragon Quest 3. Now, Dragon Quest 3 is actually chronologically set before the events of Dragon Quest 1 and 2, so it makes sense that they're actually doing the remake of Dragon Quest 3 first, coming out later this year, and then the Dragon Quest 1 and 2 will be next year. Why do I think that this is super noteworthy? I think this is emblematic of the idea that a remake, a reboot, bringing a game into the current century doesn't just need to be a generic put some fancy graphics on something and ship it out the door. Looking at the footage of this, it's absolutely stunning. And when you think about this, Dragon Quest originally in the US was Dragon Warrior. They were just very, by today's standards, crude, primitive, top-down NES games. And if you weren't super dedicated and obsessed with JRPGs back then, you would have never given this game a chance. Like, you had to be one of the faithful. I watched the Nintendo Direct with my girlfriend, partner, and producer Cassandra Hammerstone, who has never really necessarily been a turn-based RPG girl, right? But she watched that trailer and said, you know what? I think I like this. I think I'm going to give it a chance. And I looked at her almost incredulous, like, really? You're gonna play a turn-based JRPG? And she said, that looks fun. And here's the thing, it speaks to the innovation that's coming along now with how Nintendo and Square and some of the top creative developers approach these remakes. It's not simply just give it a higher visual fidelity, a little coat of paint, and throw it out the door. They do such a good job, especially when you're thinking of Dragon's Quest. You're taking something that was originally 8-bit graphics, and you are reimagining it, and you are adding such an amount of charm. You're making it more engaging. Yes, there's a turn-based system, but it's almost like it's definitely not the first thing you think about when you look at it, or even if you're playing the game. There's such a charm involved here that it's now making, I think, turn-based RPGs accessible and approachable to folks who would never give them a try before. And I think a tip of the hat to not just Nintendo, Square, but there are other examples I've seen too in recent years. But this was just a really striking example of what can be done and how good remakes can be when there's a lot of heart and a lot of love and a lot of care put into them, when they're not just seen as pure cash grabs, for example. So it was very interesting to see. And I'll give you one other example, of course, Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, the remake that just came out a little bit ago on Switch. There was also clearly a lot of care put into making sure that it wasn't just merely a strict graphics upgrade, but there was a lot of edges that got softened. There was some quality of life things that were done in there. And again, it made the concept of a turn-based RPG just a little more approachable to audiences that wouldn't necessarily go and gravitate towards that. So again, I think this is an interesting world that we're living in, where, and it's like there are some obviously houses that, again, take this like a strictly cash grab assembly line, cranking out remakes of older things and iterating on things. And then you've got developers that are really taking the time to do a great job with this. So I can't say enough good things here about the work that Nintendo and Square have been doing on these remakes. I think they're really expanding the audience for not just the individual titles, but the genres themselves. And I think that's an amazing thing to see. So, folks, I was super impressed with the Nintendo Direct. We only talked about 3 games in this video. There may be some follow-ups I do, because I have some thoughts on some of the other things, but I think I'd categorize them a little differently. So if you enjoyed this video, please let me know. Let's talk about it in the comments, how you thought about this. Do you agree with my takes? Do you think they're a little wet or somewhere in the middle on that? If you enjoy watching my stuff, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us out quite a bit. And as always, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on It's All Dug in Games.